This video is brought to you by Squarespace. Squarespace is a fantastic platform for building a website. It's all very straightforward and affordable. Go check them out at the link down in the description, but for now, let's get into the video. As she fell, the sea parted below Kiora. She had come to Pharos in search of aid. Well, maybe aid isn't the right word. Her homeworld of Zendikar was soon to be torn in half, as the Eldrazi invasion loomed on the horizon, and Kiora needed to find an ally, an army, or a weapon to fight back. Allies were impossible to trust, so Kiora didn't even try. But she knew of an army on Pharos that might work. Arixmetes was a mighty sea beast, a kraken so unfathomably large that civilization had formed on his back, and that he was an army by himself. It took Kiora a while to find him, and on her journey she impersonated an avatar of the sea god Fasa, angering the god. When she finally arrived, Fasa was already waiting for her. Their battle shook the oceans to their core, as they each summoned the mightiest beasts they could, while wrestling for control over the slumbering isle. At first, Kiora was holding her own. She might have been outnumbered, but her forces outclassed Fasa's. And unlike the god, Kiora only wanted to gain control over Arixmetes and then flee, while Fasa needed to defeat her. Eventually, she managed to close the gap, riding on a sea serpent, whereas Fasa had planted herself on Arixmetes. Then came her moment. Kiora reached out into the Kraken's mind, pleading for him to free himself from Fasa's control, to join her, to help her. But all she heard in return was mockery. "You poor fool," boomed Fasa. "You truly fought to steal a kraken from the god of the sea?" In that same moment, Kiora lost control over her own serpent, forcing her to dismiss the summon. She plummeted towards the ocean, but as she fell, the sea parted below her. She quickly summoned a large thicket of vines to soften her fall, only to be hit in the throat and pinned to the ground by Fasa's bident, which she had flung from a distance. Kiora now found herself in an arena of sorts, surrounded by Fasa's faithful, which she had called upon to witness the spectacle. The god wanted to make a show of this battle, turn it into a public execution. Kiora had lost. At most, she could hope to escape by planeswalking away, but she needed time to cast the spell. Luckily, there's never been a god that wasn't easily baited into talking by flattery. Fasa took the bait and only slowly approached the immobilized Kiora. As she nearly stood on top of her, the conversation ground to a halt, as Kiora was struggling to breathe. She was clinging with both hands to the bident, which, by Fasa's command, had only driven further into the rock, tightening the pin. All she could utter were partial words. Confident in her victory, Fasa loosened her grip. "Thanks," whispered Kiora. "For what?" asked Fasa. "The lesson in humility?" Kiora had come here for an ally, an army, or a weapon. "The bident," she hissed and melted away into the void, Fasa's weapon still clenched in her hands. The god roared in anger, too late to change what had already happened, and in the space beyond space, Kiora clutched her stolen prize and laughed. Kiora the Rising Tide is a 3-mana 3/2 with 2 abilities. When she enters the battlefield, we draw 2 cards and then discard 2 cards. And when she attacks, if we have 7 or more cards in our graveyard, she creates a Scion of the Deep, a legendary 8/8 octopus creature token. Important to note here is that this token is legendary, meaning we can only have 1 of it at a time. As soon as I read Kiora's text, I knew I had to build a deck around her. My favorite commanders are ones that give thematic guidance, supplement their deck but aren't necessary for it, and aren't so powerful that they will draw a lot of negative attention. In that way, Kiora is perfect, because she's very clearly not designed to be a commander. Instead, Kiora was intended as a card for Standard, and from what I hear, she's been performing quite well over there. But I wanted to build her as a commander, so I put her into a Mox field list, and then just stared at it for a couple of days, because I didn't really know where to begin. She helps us filter our hand while filling up the graveyard a bit, and then wants us to have even more cards in the graveyard, and is also primarily a creature combat commander, giving us an enormous land to attack with. Now, blue has access to a variety of self-milling effects, which would help us get the Scion into play quickly. However, self-milling isn't a good game plan by itself. It needs to be accompanied by another strategy that then makes use of the graveyard. The most common example of this are Golgari self-mill reanimation decks. They fill up the graveyard and then use it to mana cheat, which is a powerful strategy. But there aren't really any reanimation cards in mono blue. Or are there? I guess there's Artisan of Kozilek, which is a 9-mana colorless Eldrazi that reanimates something if we cast it. So, that's a card? There's also Portal to Phyrexia, but that's a €25 card, so we're not playing that. Wait, hold on. Blue might not have reanimation, but it does have cards that resemble reanimation. For example, Scholar of the Lost Trove is a 7-mana 5/5 with flying, that when it enters, lets us cast an instant, sorcery or artifact card out of our graveyard without paying its mana cost. Torrential Gearhook does the same, except not for artifacts. If we accept that this kind of recasting counts as reanimation, then cards that have Flashback, Encore, or other similar mechanics should also count. And if we are casting out of our graveyard, then we can discard those cards to Kiora without it feeling like we're actually discarding. If we are discarding Deep Analysis, for example, then looting is arguably even better than drawing a card, because we are playing into connected synergies. That feels like a solid game plan. Now we just have a few more decisions to make. Since Kiora is strongly associated with large sea monsters, I think it makes sense to lean into them as our main win condition. This means we want to play Kedarect Leviathan, which is an 8-mana 5/5 that bounces all non-land permanents when it enters and has Unearth. It fits perfectly, being a giant monster that also can be played out of the graveyard. But with that in the deck, we really don't want to play any mana rocks. I personally already don't like mana rocks very much, as they often just die incidentally, so we want to focus on land-based ramp. We definitely do need good ramp though, since a lot of our cards are going to be quite expensive. This leads us to Matzalantli, the Great Door, which is a 3-mana artifact that lets us tap it to loot. For 4 mana, we can also tap it to transform it into the Core, a powerful land that taps for mana equal to the number of permanent cards in our graveyard. Matzalantli is a perfect fit for our deck, but its transformation comes with a condition. To flip it, we need to have 4 or more different permanent types in our graveyard. This means we want to spread out our selection of types, so we can reach this goal quickly, and we also want to minimize sorceries and instants. This then opens the door to playing Aminatus Augury, an 8-mana sorcery that exiles the top 8 cards of our deck, and then until the end of turn, lets us cast 1 card of each card type from among those without paying their mana costs. Aminatus Augury is very powerful. Its intended play pattern already aligns with our current goals, and it makes for an amazing reanimation target. It's another great fit as a guideline card for our deck. Okay, with that we have a clear idea of our theme and a good selection of core cards that we're trying to build around. Now it's time to start actually putting the deck together, which I will fast forward for you because it was a process that took me a long time and has resulted in the greatest deck I have ever built. It might be mono blue, but it plays nothing like any mono blue deck you have ever seen. Oh, and also, please don't forget to give the video a thumbs up. Thank you very much. Let me start out by saying that this deck features a lot of synergies that extend across multiple cards and different categories. So to explain them, we will go on a few detours here and there to explore those in detail. While self-milling is a way to fill up our graveyard, and we do play Codex Shredder, it's not the best way for us to do it. Looting, as in drawing a card and then discarding a card, works much better, as it allows us to make more precise selections while also sculpting our hand to our needs. And so we play a significant looting package. Looter Ilkor, Lore Broker, Malcolm Alluring Scoundrel, Shoreline Looter, Smuggler's Copter, Moon Circuit Hacker, Unctus Grand Metatect, and Overlord of the Flood Pits are all basic looters that come with a bit of a range of different upsides. The evasive looters are great for applying a bit of early pressure, but also to flip Dowsing Dagger, one of our important ramp pieces. Moon Circuit Hacker then makes for a great turn 4 if we played Kiora on turn 3, which we often want to do since she's also a powerful looter. We attack with Kiora, ninjutsu her out with the Moon Circuit Hacker, and then play her again for another round of looting. Unctus Grand Metatect works in a similar fashion, letting us double up on our other looters. Overlord of the Flood Pits then is twice as good as the rest by drawing 2 cards instead of just 1. Moon Circuit, Flood Pits and Unctus also each have the additional benefit of bringing in a second type, being enchantment and artifact creatures respectively. My favorite looter though has to be Lore Broker, who taps to make all players loot, which then synergizes with Geth's Grimoire, turning it into an incredible card draw engine. To support the Grimoire even further, we are also playing Gaia Reach Sanitarium, another loot for everybody effect, but this time attached to a land. I even went as far as to include a Cephalid Colosseum, but that one is definitely a bit more sketchy, so feel free to skip it. These looters form the basis of our early game. Get them out quickly and then start cycling to find what's necessary for any given matchups. This deck only plays 3 counterspells, as it's focused around permanence. Be patient when using them. Don't just aim to slow down your opponents, but instead to fully prevent a crucial play. Our counterspells are Refute, a 3-mana counterspell that also loots, Spellgyre, a 4-mana counterspell with a second mode that lets us surveil 2 and then draw 2, and Circular Logic, a 3-mana counterspell that makes our opponent pay 1 additional mana for each card in our graveyard, which is usually much more than they could ever pay, so it's essentially just a hard counter. But it also has Madness, letting us cast it for only a single blue mana if we discard it. Looting into Madness means that the loot is essentially just a draw with additional upside, which is great. But for Circular Logic, we need to do it at instant speed, which can sometimes be a bit tricky. But we do play cards that can do it. Lore Broker is a way for us to discard during our opponent's turn, and so are Mazzalantli and Dreamscape Artist from our ramp package. On top of that, we play 1 Flicker effect in Blur, which can let Kiora re-enter to loot again to set up for the Madness discard from Circular Logic. Blur can also re-trigger Scholar or Gearhook to reuse some of our crucial interaction. Circular Logic isn't our only card that directly benefits from the discard of our looting. Containment Construct lets us play the cards we have discarded, which works particularly well with lands. Use Containment Construct to play looted lands directly out of the graveyard, turning the looting into card draw. Most impressive though is Reenact the Crime, a 4-mana instant that exiles a non-land card from a graveyard that was put there this turn, and then we copy it and cast the copy without paying its mana cost. We smack somebody with Shoreline Looter on turn 4 to loot away an Artisan of Kozilek to reenact the crime it, to cast it, to then reanimate something else we already placed in the graveyard beforehand. Reenact the Crime is a general all-star that can reanimate our permanents and occasionally even steal crucial game pieces from our opponents, as it's not limited to just our graveyard. It's one of the strongest cards in our deck, and I'm guessing the only reason it doesn't see more play is because of the 3 blue mana symbols in its casting cost. But for us, that's not a problem. we can use it to its fullest extent with complex lines as mentioned earlier, or simple ones like using Wake of Wave's own ability to discard it to then reenact the crime and bring a 7/7 onto the board at instant speed. While what I'm describing here might seem optimistic, always keep in mind that we are constantly looting, letting us sculpt our hand to have these lines available. This video is sponsored and brought to you by Squarespace. Squarespace is a fantastic platform for building a website. It's truly great. I've used it personally for every website that I've ever had, and it's always been just an absolute treat. That's because Squarespace lets you customize everything from the ground up. You can go in with nothing and just build exactly how you want it to be. At the same time, you don't have to. You can stick to professionally built templates that look and feel perfect. Everything about them was carefully built and considered, and they will make your business, your website, your portfolio look just as professional. However, if you want to customize, you can, and that's something that I really appreciate about Squarespace. They are not afraid to let you mess up, I guess. No. Look, it's up to you is what I'm saying. You have the choice, and that's something I appreciate. Squarespace is also a very customer-friendly service that offers a lot of support. So if you ever have any problems, you can browse their library of tutorials, or you can just ask for help and they are happy to provide it. Go check out Squarespace at the link down in the description, and thank you very much to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. Wake of Waves is part of our Big Beater package. Originally only added it because it can discard itself to look at the top two cards of our deck and then draw one and discard another, which is actually a really nice way of filling up our graveyard. But as I played with it, it turns out that shrinking all of our opponent's creatures by even just a small amount, even just as simple as -1/-0, seriously limits the damage of a lot of decks. So it's been really overperforming. Additionally, we also play the aforementioned Artisan and Cataract Leviathan on top of Phyrexian Triniform, which has Encore and is an artifact, opening it up for reanimation either through itself or Scholar of the Lost Trove. Netherhold Primal Tide is an incredible value engine that is difficult to remove, and Scourge of Fleets comes with an attached one-sided board vibe. These, in addition to Kiora's Scion of the Deep, Torrential Gearhulk and Scholar of the Lost Trove, are the creatures that we use to kill our opponents. The way it usually works out is that during the early game we poke our opponents for a bit of damage here and there and prepare our resources until we can flood the board, bounce everything they control, and then crash into our opponents for 20 to 30 damage at once. To make sure our board actually manages to make its way to our opponents' faces, we play two more one-sided sweepers. Spectral Deluge has the same effect as Scourge of the Fleets, returning all creatures our opponents control with toughness less than we control islands to their hand. To make sure we have enough islands for this, our deck mostly plays islands as its mana base, making it nice and cheap. We play 40 lands in total, and I would not recommend cutting that amount. Keep in mind we can always just loot excess lands away, so getting flooded isn't really a problem. I would much rather have too many lands in hand with this deck instead of risking getting mana screwed. To get back to our AoE, we also play Ugin's Binding, a 3-mana instant that bounces a non-land permanent. However, once it's in the graveyard and we cast a colorless spell with mana value 7 or greater, we get to exile it from the graveyard and return all non-land permanents our opponents control to their hand. An important distinction here is that it doesn't say we need to spend 7 or more mana, we just need to cast a spell with a mana value of 7 or higher. Which means if we cast an Artisan with an Augury or a Triniform with a Scholar, we are also given the opportunity to Cyclonic Rift for free. To ensure that we have enough cards at a high enough mana value for Ugin's Binding to trigger, we also play Wondrous Crucible, a 7-mana artifact that gives our permanents Ward 2, and at the end of our turn, it mills 2 cards and then lets us randomly cast a non-land card from our graveyard. Wondrous Crucible protects our board, makes for a nice additional target to return, and even acts as reanimation itself. I have yet to lose a game where I managed to stick it on the board. This seems like a great moment to talk about our reanimation. Our self-reanimators are the essence of this deck, as they are the ones we throw into the graveyard as part of our looting, letting us build a facsimile of card advantage. While they aren't exactly in our hand, we still have access to them, and they are often very low commitment options, giving us nice plays without needing to commit major resources. Malevolent Hermit and Mischievous Catgeist are disturb cards that are easy to play in the early game and then reanimate into useful effects later. Mirrorhole Mimic, on the other hand, is a bit more specific, being a clone on the front side and then a clone factory on the back. Cloning in general is fairly common for our selection here, as Self-Reflection, Quasi-Duplicate and Cackling Counterpart are all clones that can be played from the graveyard in one way or another. Copying our creatures is a very powerful effect in this deck, as we deliberately don't play too many legendaries and have powerful ETBs. For example, we can copy Scourge of the Fleets to bounce our opponent's stuff for a second or third time, or reanimate another target with a duplicated Scholar of the Lost Trove. For bonus points, we can even use Torrential Gearhook on a clone in the graveyard to give us another Torrential Gearhook for another clone to build a small army instantly. We can even clone Kiora during the early game to re-trigger her ETB and get closer to the Scion. Now, the Scion is legendary, which means we can only have one, and that's just a tad bit too limiting, isn't it? That's why we play Mirror Box, a 3-mana artifact that says the legend rule doesn't apply to our permanents, while also being a bit of a lord. If we have Mirror Box in play, we can attack with Kiora repeatedly to make multiple Scions, or we can even clone Kiora to make multiple Scions per turn. Doubling up on Nessa Hall is a bit less effective, but still good. We play one more card along these lines, which is Psychic Paper, a 2-mana equipment that gives the equipped creature Ward 1 and Unblockable. It also lets us choose a new creature name and type for that creature when we attach to it. We can attach it to Kiora to make her unblockable and protect her a little bit, making it easier for us to attack and then trigger the Scion. Or we can attach it to a Scion to make a second Scion. Even better is its synergy with some of our ramp. We play Mitotic Manipulation, which lets us look at the top 7 cards of our deck and then put one of them onto the battlefield if it shares a name with a permanent already there. We also play Retraced Image, which lets us do the same thing but from our hand. Most of the time, these are here to get an island into play. They are land ramp, but with Psychic Paper, we can first name one of our beaters as we attach it, and then use Retraced Image or Mitotic Manipulation to cheat them directly into play. For Retraced Image, we just need the upper piece in hand, but for Mitotic Manipulation, we gotta gamble a bit. But hey, worst case scenario, we just take an island. Returning to the graveyard, we also play Wonder to give everything flying, Amphin Mutineer for targeted removal, and Skyway Robber as a very slow and somewhat clunky way to reanimate something. It has Escape, meaning it can be cast from the graveyard for 4 mana and by exiling 5 other cards. Then, if Skyway Robber deals combat damage to a player, we can cast one artifact, instant or sorcery from among the exiled cards without paying its mana cost. The trick with Skyway Robbery is to not go for the highest value plays. We don't want to aim for an augury with him. Don't place your hopes on the boy, he can't do that much. Because if something huge is put underneath him, he's probably just gonna get killed immediately. It's better to aim for smaller value plays that just push for a bit of an advantage, like getting a Formatic Compass or Everflowing Well out of the graveyard. This then brings us to our ramp package. As I already mentioned, we don't want mana rocks as they are too easily wiped out. Instead, we're relying entirely on land-based ramp. Some of it comes directly through Retraced Image, Dreamscape Artist, Copy Land, Mitotic Manipulation, Terrain Generator, and Solemn Simulacrum. Solemn in particular also works great with our cloning effects. On top of that, we play a suite of flip lands. Dowsing Dagger, Search for Ascanta, Formatic Compass, Mazzalantli, the Great Door, the Everflowing Well, and Golden Guardian. Ascanta, Mazzalantli, and the Everflowing Well are particularly great because they also fill up our graveyard before becoming powerful lands with additional utility. Dowsing Dagger is always an MVP, and Golden Guardian is an incredibly effective defensive line during the early game that we can eventually flip by fighting it into a Scion. The best advice I can give here is to try to flip Mazzalantli and Dowsing Dagger as quickly as possible, as they will give you an overwhelming mana advantage. Lost Vale can also be copied with Copy Land, which is game ending, but don't be afraid to just cast Copy Land on an island. Ultimately, Copy Land is just a way to ramp, and it's fine if that's all it ends up doing. That's nearly all of it. Let's close out the loose ends. We play a bit of additional card draw with Fibblefib, Scrolling Crawler, River Kelpie, and Bident of Fassa. The Bident is mostly here for flavor reasons, but it's also one of very few enchantment artifacts, which is definitely handy for some of our synergies. I would also have liked to play Kiora Bess, the Sea God, but it's like €7, and that's just too expensive for flavor inclusion. Then we have Case of the Shifting Visage as another way to accelerate our board in the late game, Reality Shift as targeted removal, and Change of Plans as a protection tool, although it's not super good. Feel free to replace Change of Plans. And that's it. That's the deck. This deck does not play like it's blue. It feels a lot closer to a Golgari Reanimation Shell, and it shares many of its weaknesses. Graveyard hate can be a serious problem for us, but it's actually not that bad. While ideally we get to play out of the graveyard, ultimately the deck can function fine without it. I've played matches where my graveyard got nuked multiple times, or when I never got to use Kiora, and I still always felt like I had a lot of options available to me, and I ended up winning those games. This stems from the non-stop looting, always letting us adjust to the current situation. However, if you are in an environment where Rest in Peace or similar cards are popular, I do recommend playing some additional enchantment removal. As for upgrades, I don't have much I can say. This deck is very well tuned for its theme. While you could add generic good stuff, I don't think that would make the deck better, just stronger. Overall, I'm very proud of this deck. It's unique, sticks tightly to its theme, and is great fun to play. It always feels like we have a million options available to ourselves, and those only lead to further extended synergies. There are so many connected pieces that stretch through every part of this deck that I found myself contemplating lines long after the game had already finished. And it's not an expensive deck. It sits at €58 on Moxfield. I ordered the full list for 70 from Card Market. There are certainly some cuts you could make to get it down to 50, like replacing Nessa Hole, Retraced Image, and Terrain Generator. But I wanted to show you the list as I have it, which included some cards I already owned. To be honest, I wasn't originally planning on making another deck tech so soon, but I put this together and started playing it, and I just had to share. It's my greatest work. And honestly, I think you guys would enjoy it a lot too. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I would love to play this deck on stream against you guys soon. Feel free to join one of our Friday streams for that. And I hope to see you guys soon. Don't forget to give the video a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe. And goodbye.